Following on from the last instalment, which I started off by stating that rational therapies can't ever work, the question that follows, obviously enough, the obvious question that follows is, well, if rational therapies don't work, assuming for the sake of the argument, we'll go along with that and we'll assume, okay, so they don't work, then what does? And in order to answer that, it's helpful to go into neurosis and neurotic suffering, neurotic struggling more carefully. And once we do that, then we kind of set on the road for having an answer for that question. There's a writer, an Italian fellow, who wrote Foucault's Pendulum. His name is, I think his name is Umberto Eco, or something like that. I'll have to check up on that later. But he said something very interesting about the universe. That if we went with that, we could really have a very elegant way of looking at what neurosis is. So what Umberto said was that the universe is a harmless enigma. It's an enigma, but it's an enigma that's not going to bite us or attack us or bore into us. It's kind of like a nice dog sleeping on the carpet or lying on the sofa, and you can just pat him and he'll wag his tail because he's harmless. And in the same way, the enigma which lies at the heart of the universe can be said to be harmless. Umberto says that it's harmless, so we'll go with that. It's his quote after all. But he does qualify this, and he goes on to say, it's harmless unless we try and make sense of it, in which case it turns into a demon. It turns into something which will be our ruin, because there is no making sense of it. So when we get locked onto that struggle, as we do get locked onto that struggle, it's as if we're banging our heads against a brick wall. And because we're so stubborn, not consciously stubborn, but stubborn in a very deep down kind of way, we're just going to dash ourselves to pieces against this enigma. So we could say that in its pure form, very few of us run the risk of being damaged by the demonic form of the enigma, because we're not really likely to start trying to understand what the universe is, or how it came about, or what it means, or anything like that. We're just not likely to do that. We just get on with stuff. Very, very few people sit down and wrestle with the enigma of existence, in my experience anyway. So that's kind of good for us in a way. But even though we don't contend with the enigma in the pure sense of the word, we meet it elsewhere in life, and there we do get driven crazy by it, really. Now, the reason we don't go there with the enigma at the heart of the universe is because Well, one reason would be that we're content enough with what's going on superficially without really feeling the need to go into the heart of the matter. And another reason is that we're provided with lots of answers, which, whilst they may not be true, they're answers, and so we can just be satisfied with them, and we want to be satisfied with them, of course. So all the beliefs that we have and all the beliefs that humankind has ever had are safeguards against the enigma. And God has become a safeguard against the enigma, oddly enough. And that is an odd thing. That we should make God into something safe to comfort us and protect us from this terrible, terrible enigma. Because if we were thinking clearly about it, we'd see that God is the terrible, terrible enigma. Just as Jesus says, "He who is near me is near unto the fire," or something like that. And just as the Jewish saying says, God is not nice, he is an earthquake. But all the same, we use God a lot as just an easy answer. Well, it's God. God said it, God did it. End of story. And anyone who's had any experience with religious communities knows that questioning like this is not encouraged. Once someone tells you it's God, that's it, no more questioning. So that's done in God's name, with God's name. And so, curiously, ironically, religion becomes a way for us to stay unconscious, to stay asleep. It becomes like a few tabs of Valium or Nembutal or Seconal or some kind of sleeping pill or an opiate. It becomes something like that. Religion is the opiate of the masses, as your man said. So we don't get traumatized by the enigma that is the universe in day-to-day existence. But we're not really safe. Because as I said just a minute ago, we tangle with that enigma in other forms. And so that's when the link with neurosis comes in. Because it could be said that neurosis, at root, is us messing with this enigma and not being satisfied with it. And so, when we mess with the enigma and try and resolve it, what happens is we get locked into a never-ending struggle. And this never-ending struggle escalates and escalates as we try to reach the resolution, because the resolution is the only way we can escape the pain as far as we're concerned. And so, as it escalates, the pain grows greater, our torment becomes greater, and that's neurotic hell. Lots of examples of this can be given. Perfectionism is a nice clear example. So if I want everything to be perfect and just so, that is really trying to make everything super non-enigmatic. Because unbeknownst to myself, I want to get rid of that enigma. And to a certain extent, we can get away with making everything neat and tidy and banishing all traces of any terrifying enigma-type nature to the universe. But in the case of neurosis, we do what everyone else does, only we push it even more because we're driven by a need to compensate even more, because our awareness of something not right at the heart of it all is greater, ironically. So in that way, we can say that when we're suffering from neurosis, it's because we're got this dawning awareness. We're actually more aware than people who just happily going along with their lives in an apparently non-neurotic way. So they're actually doing better than we are when it comes down to it, in that sense, in the sense that they're more involved with the truth, however unwillingly, and less involved in illusion. So with perfectionism, when we really push it, we discover that nothing can ever be perfect, and so we work harder and harder to get it to be perfect, and our sense of perspective narrows the whole time, so it becomes more and more distressing when things aren't perfect. And yet we're now tuning into the fact that we're up against an implacable enemy, or an implacable impossibility, which is the impossibility of ever getting everything perfect, anything perfect. Another example is anxiety. Instead of perfection, we just can swap the word safe or risk-free. So we're all thinking like that. We're all orientated towards safety and the elimination of risks wherever possible. But in anorexia, we're compensating more, we're driven more, because we've got this intimation of the unsafeness of existence. So we have to push harder to compensate for it. But then we discover what happens when we do push harder. Again, we're tangling with an impossibility, the impossibility of making everything safe, of eliminating risk. And this discovery, when we make it, fills us with dread and fear and anguish and anxiety. Even though it doesn't make sense to say anxiety fills us with anxiety, but the thing is that this discovery in itself doesn't necessarily lead to anxiety. If I make the discovery myself through my own experience, through my own life, in my own life, that everything is risk and risk can never be eliminated, that's the truth. That's a very interesting thing to discover, and it could be liberating. But it isn't liberating if my orientation is fundamentally towards making everything safe, which is to say, if my orientation is obeying fear. In which case, I only have one option, which is to try very, very hard to find a way to beat reality, to find a way of making everything safe and secure when that can't be done. So I get locked into the impossible struggle. And the same thing happens. The more I get locked into it, the less perspective I have, the more tunnel vision I have, and the more acutely sensitive I am to things not being right or things being slightly risky, with the result being that every single little risk in life, current or projected, becomes enough to put me through sheer torture. So that's neurotic hell in anxiety. So we could go on, we could say much the same thing for OCD, and say that for most of us we check a couple of times and we never pay attention to the fact that even if I've checked whether the door's locked twice, there's still a small chance that I was wrong in my checking, or not paying attention properly, or fell asleep for a second, or only imagined that I checked when I didn't check, or dreamt it. Because when we start to look for that certainty, which most of us don't, but when we do start to look for it, we discover that it isn't there. So we just keep on looking and looking and looking because we don't know what else to do. And that looking and looking and looking and checking and checking and checking is us dashing ourselves against the brick wall of the impossibility. And if you've ever tried dashing yourself against a brick wall, you'll know that that's a very painful thing. Especially when our activity of tangling with the brick wall is escalating the whole time, becoming more and more frantic, more and more heedless. So we're just basically putting ourselves through the ringer. And the more we do this, the less we are able to see that there's any other possibility than to carry on doing this in the blind hope that it will somehow work out okay, even though it never has done before as a result of us doing what we're doing. Which isn't a hope at all, because actually we know that that is not going to happen. Deep down we know it, and that's what gives anxiety the flavour that it does have. We know that it's not going to happen, but we have to keep on acting as if we believe in a desperate attempt to find it, because we don't know what else to do. That's the only thing we've got to do, is control. So in all these cases, what's happening is that the central enigma of which is the universe, which is harmless, like a nice friendly Labrador, is being met with the rational mind, which is, as I've said over and over again, it's like a machine. It's just a pure machine. It just needs to make everything right according to its plan of what is right. It just needs everything to accord with its ideas of how things should be. So it can be seen that the rational mind can never ever accept an enigma. It's a red rag to a bull. The rational mind cannot be okay with an enigma. Never ever, ever, no matter how many therapy sessions you go to, the rational mind can never be okay with an enigma. It's against its nature. The rational mind is black and white. Either it's yes or no. It's in this category or that category. It's got nothing to do with enigmas. Enigmas are the thing that it really doesn't like. There's a story about Pythagoras drowning one of his students. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but it could be true. And the story is that one of his students gets this flash, and he understands that they are these things called irrational numbers, very, very messy numbers that just keep on. They're not numbers that end in a neat way. They just keep going on. So it's like 0.7436 on and on and on and on. And he told Pythagoras, and the ancient Greeks had a big thing about neatness and everything being perfect in a kind of a neat way. And Pythagoras, even more than anyone else, was, it seems, particularly sold on this way of looking at numbers and maths. So the story is, he invited the student to come out for a sail with him on his boats, and that when Pythagoras came back, he was the only one on board, because he'd thrown his errant student into the Aegean for coming up with this monstrosity. So that's just it. The point of this story isn't to blame Pythagoras, but really just to say that Pythagoras illustrates, if this were true, going along with the argument, supposing that it is true, or was true, then Pythagoras is just illustrating how the reaction that the rational mind has when faced with an enigma, or an irrational number, or any evidence of chaos. So what everything that we've said so far shows, very, very clearly is that the rational mind is not good with enigmas. It's not good with them at all. It's like someone who isn't good with dogs, and even when the dog is a very nice, friendly natured dog, this person will somehow get them to bare their teeth and growl. So that's what the relationship between the rational mind and the enigma is. And you don't want to get the enigma growling at you and showing its teeth, because there's only one person going to get hurt then, and that's going to be you. No one ever hurt the enigma. And also it's so perverse, isn't it? To pick on a nice friendly enigma and turn it into a demon. What the hell would we want to do that for? God's sake. Are we stupid or what? And it's not that we are stupid. It's the rational mind is stupid. And it's not that the rational mind is stupid. It's just being mechanical, which is what it is. It's not stupid. It's just mechanical. We're stupid in a way to let it do our business for us. So when we're dealing with the enigma, either in the most essential form, the enigma of existence itself, or in any other form such as uncertainty or risk or irrationality, things behaving in an irrational way or an untidy way, then we don't meet with that with the rational mind, which is this little tiny part of us, which is good for some things but not for this, obviously. We meet it with the whole of ourselves. Or another way of saying that is we meet it with consciousness. And consciousness does not cause the enigma to snarl at us and snap at us. It's just like we're patting the enigma on their head and saying, "How you doing, boy? You're a nice doggy." And everything's fine then. So the question is, how do we meet neurosis with consciousness instead of the thinking mind? So hopefully I can go into that in the next installment. Thanks for watching.